The terminal buzzed with the familiar chaos of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. Families hustled past one another, rolling luggage clattering across tile floors. Flight 372 to Los Angeles was scheduled to depart in 30 minutes, and the gate area hummed with low chatter, distant announcements, and the faint aroma of overpriced coffee. Among the travelers, a young woman named Emma Hayes adjusted the strap of her laptop bag, trying not to draw attention. Blonde hair tucked behind her ears, navy blue jacket snug against her frame. She exuded the quiet intensity of someone used to planning, calculating, and observing the world in detail. Emma was only 22, a college senior balancing her aerospace engineering degree and ROTC training. She had flown small planes for practice, spent hours in flight simulators, and memorized charts, procedures, and emergency protocols. None of it seemed extraordinary, just preparation. But today, she had a nagging sense of anticipation, a flutter of unease she couldn't explain. Sliding into seat 12F, Emma stowed her laptop and took a deep breath. Across the aisle, a father tried to calm his 2-year-old, who whimpered and reached for the window. Behind her, 2 teenagers argued quietly over a video game. The cabin crew made their final announcements, and the engines began to roar to life. It was an ordinary flight, until it was. 20 minutes after takeoff, the plane had reached cruising altitude. Emma tried to lose herself in her notes, scribbling down designs for a lightweight drone she'd been working on. But a low hum of tension ran through the cabin. Something didn't feel right. She looked up just as the plane shuddered, a sudden, violent jolt that sent her pen flying across the aisle. "What the hell?" a passenger muttered, gripping the armrests. Drinks spilled and overhead compartments rattled. The hum of the engines became irregular, almost mechanical, and the air pressure in the cabin seemed to shift. A sharp voice over the intercom cut through the rising panic. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing minor turbulence. Please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts." Minor turbulence. The words felt hollow, almost mocking. Emma's instincts screamed that this was something far worse. Another thud, harder this time, and the plane pitched violently to one side. She grabbed the armrests, trying to steady herself. Passengers screamed. Children cried. Some people prayed aloud. The co-pilot's voice rang out, panicked, almost unrecognizable through the static. "Mayday! Engine failure! Mayday! We are losing thrust!" Emma froze. Her stomach dropped. She swallowed hard, glancing at her seatmates' terrified faces. Across the aisle, a man clutched his young son to his chest, whispering frantic reassurances he didn't believe himself. The flight attendants were tense, faces pale, trying to maintain calm with a veneer that didn't fool anyone. Then came the most chilling moment. The captain slumped forward, unconscious, his head resting against the console. Silence enveloped the cockpit, broken only by the horrifying roar of failing engines. The plane trembled as if testing its own endurance. Emma's breath quickened. Her mind raced. Every simulation, every emergency drill, every ROTC lesson screamed at her. Someone has to act. Someone has to take control. Her pulse thundered in her ears as passengers clung to their seats, some sobbing, some screaming. Emma felt the sudden weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders, cold and sharp. She was a college student, a passenger, an ordinary woman, but she knew instinctively that the ordinary wouldn't survive what was coming. She unbuckled her seatbelt, ignoring the protests and gasps from around her. She started, but words failed. Instead, she rose, moving with surprising decisiveness toward the cockpit. The cabin crew tried to stop her. "You can't," one shouted. "It's too dangerous." "I don't have a choice," Emma said, her voice firm despite the fear slicing through her chest. The cockpit door was locked. She pounded on it with the strength born of adrenaline and desperation. "Captain, co-pilot, someone wake up!" Her knuckles bruised against the metal. Panic rippled through the cabin like a living thing, a wave she refused to succumb to. The radio crackled suddenly, sharp and authoritative. Flight 372, this is Eagle 1. We are responding to your distress signal. Can you hear me? Emma froze. Eagle 1. The code words, the precision in that voice, it was military. F-22 jets were circling above, fully aware of the crisis she was in. Her heart raced. She had trained for emergencies like this, in simulations, in ROTC, in weekend exercises, but never in real life with real people's lives hanging by a thread. The radio spoke again. Step aside from the controls, ma'am. Identify yourself. What is your call sign? Emma's mind raced. She was just a passenger, just Emma. But the name that sprang to her lips was one she had earned years ago, one she had almost forgotten. Nightstorm. The cabin seemed to hold its breath as the radio went silent for a heartbeat. Then came the crackle of astonishment. Nightstorm. Confirm you're the one trained in evasive aerial maneuvers. Emma's pulse jumped. She realized the moment's gravity. She was no longer merely a passenger. The two F-22 pilots above her plane knew her skills. They had trained with her during her ROTC exercises. And now, for the first time, she was about to test those skills in real, life-threatening conditions. She turned back toward the cockpit, hands trembling but determination hardening her expression. Around her, passengers whispered prayers, gripping each other. Some stared in disbelief at the young woman who had just claimed a call sign they couldn't comprehend. Emma Hayes, passenger 12F, had no choice but to step into a role she had never imagined she would fill. The plane lurched again, violently, as if reminding her that death was always one heartbeat away. Cliffhanger, Emma realized that to survive, to save everyone on board, she would have to become the pilot and fast. The eyes of hundreds and the F-22 pilots circling above were on her. And for the first time in her life, fear became a tool, not a cage. The cockpit door was still locked, a thin barrier between chaos and survival. Emma's hands shook as she pounded on it again, desperation rising with every second. The plane groaned, pitching violently as passengers screamed and clutched seatbacks. Drinks spilled across the aisle, toddlers cried, and the low roar of failing engines seemed to mock them all. The radio crackled once more, firm and unyielding. Flight 372, this is Eagle 1. We are in position above you. Step back from the cockpit and confirm your call sign. Emma's heart pounded. Her mind raced through every drill, every simulation she had endured, every late-night session in the flight simulator at the ROTC hangar. She had never imagined it would come to this. Real engines failing, hundreds of lives on the line, F-22 fighters above her plane waiting for her response. Her voice trembled but carried a decisive edge. Nightstorm, she said, the name tasting foreign and familiar on her tongue. Silence followed. Then the crackle of disbelief. Nightstorm, confirm you're the one we trained. The one who mastered evasive maneuvers in simulated F-22 engagements. Emma swallowed hard. Memories of the training flooded her. The sweat-streaked mornings, the early drills, the harsh instructors, the endless push to control fear. Nightstorm had been a call sign reserved for precision, fearlessness, and instinct under pressure. It was no longer just a name, it was a promise. I am, she said, her voice steadier now. She could feel the weight of hundreds of lives pressing against her chest, a physical force she had never imagined. I can help. Copy that. Maintain control of your aircraft. Do not attempt landing yet. You are our eyes and hands in this emergency, Eagle One's voice replied, calm and commanding. We will guide you. Repeat, we will guide you. Emma's hands were clammy as she approached the cockpit once more, glancing at the terrified faces around her. Flight attendants were frozen mid-step, passengers wide-eyed. She could see the young father, his hands trembling, clutching his son. She swallowed the lump in her throat. I can't fail them, she thought. I just can't. The door's lock mechanism clicked under her persistent force, finally giving way. Emma's shoulder slammed against the frame, and the door swung open just enough for her to squeeze through. The cockpit smelled faintly of burnt metal and coffee, the alarms blinking red in warning. The captain slumped against the console, barely conscious. The co-pilot's head lolled to the side. Emma's stomach twisted, but she didn't have time to mourn or panic. She had to act. Okay, she muttered to herself, leaning over the controls. Remember the simulator, remember the drills, don't think, just act. She scanned the panels rapidly. Engine 1 was sputtering, warning lights flashing. Hydraulics were inconsistent. Autopilot had disengaged. Her mind worked like a high-speed processor, recalling every procedure, every lever, every emergency protocol she had learned. But nothing could replicate the roar of a real jet engine struggling to stay aloft. "Nightstorm," Eagle One's lead pilot barked over the radio. "We see you have partial engine control. Stabilize at 32,000 feet and keep the nose steady. I repeat, 32,000 feet. We're guiding you from above. Can you maintain?" Emma's teeth clenched. Her eyes flicked between the altimeter, engine readouts, and the horizon streaked gray with the approaching storm. I think so," she said, though her voice betrayed none of her terror. "Good," the pilot said. "Listen carefully. You'll need to execute a climb maneuver to avoid turbulence. Flaps at 25%, throttle adjustments in 3, 2. The plane lurched violently, nearly throwing Emma into the console. Her stomach flipped as she grabbed the throttles and flaps, her hands moving with instinctive precision. Outside the cockpit, the passengers braced, their screams muffled by fear and pressure. Emma's gaze flicked to the window. 2 F-22 jets streaked past, flanking the commercial aircraft with terrifying grace. The fighter pilots opened their canopies mid-flight to shout encouragement. "We've got you, Nightstorm. Keep her steady," one yelled, voice nearly lost in the roar of wind and engines. The weight of responsibility pressed on Emma like gravity itself. Sweat streaked down her face, her hands shaking with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. One wrong move and hundreds of lives, innocent civilians, sleeping children, elderly passengers, could vanish in an instant. She adjusted the flaps. She monitored the throttles. She reminded herself to breathe, to focus. The storm ahead grew darker, clouds swirling, lightning slicing the sky like jagged knives. A sudden jolt threw her sideways. Sparks erupted from one of the cockpit panels. The engine warning lights flashed red in urgent warning. Emma felt the pressure mounting, a tangible, suffocating force, but she refused to falter. "Nightstorm, adjust throttle now," Eagle One's voice shouted. Emma obeyed, leaning into the controls. Her heart pounded in her chest as the plane stabilized for a brief, terrifying second. Her thoughts raced. "I can do this. I have to do this. People are counting on me." Below her, passengers were gripping seatbacks, whispering prayers or sobbing openly. Some had begun to notice her, the young woman from seat 12F, standing now with the confidence and precision of a trained pilot. Their eyes widened, confusion blending with hope. Could she really save them? She adjusted the yoke slightly, correcting the pitch. The plane responded ever so slightly. She repeated the maneuver, focusing intently, sweat stinging her eyes. She could feel the engine straining, but she held firm. Then came a new, sharper vibration, something metallic groaning inside the fuselage. A sense of dread prickled her spine. Eagle One's voice came through again, calm but urgent. "Nightstorm, we're detecting a failing hydraulic system. Steering will be limited. You need to keep her straight until we can guide you to an emergency approach." Emma's stomach lurched. Limited steering. That meant every movement had to be precise, perfect, calculated to the millisecond. A single misjudgment could send the plane spiraling. The passengers gasped as the cabin tilted slightly, a sharp dip that caused unsecured items to slide across the floor. A child cried loudly, echoing off the fuselage. Emma's fingers tightened around the controls. She could feel the fear of every single person pressing into her chest like a physical weight, but she refused to give in. Her mind flashed back to the ROTC instructor's words during one late-night simulation. Fear is a tool, not a cage. She breathed deeply, centering herself. Fear was not her enemy, it was her ally, keeping her sharp, aware, alive. Emma spoke into the radio. "I've got it. I'm ready," she said, determination steel hard in her voice. "Tell me what to do." "Nightstorm," Eagle One's pilot replied, "you're extraordinary, keep your focus. We'll guide you step by step. You're in control now, but we're with you. Everyone's counting on you, don't fail." Emma swallowed. She realized the truth. She wasn't just a passenger. She was the pilot now. The weight of the plane, the lives of hundreds, the desperate eyes of everyone below, they rested on her. And the F-22 pilots above, they had faith in her, a faith earned years ago during grueling drills and long nights of training. The plane lurched again, violently. Emma's hands gripped the yoke, knuckles white, pulse racing. Outside, dark clouds swirled, lightning striking near the wings, rain slamming against the windows. The storm was closing in. Cliffhanger. Emma Hayes, passenger 12F, realized in that split second that she had crossed the line from ordinary life to extraordinary responsibility. If she failed now, everyone on board and she herself would die. And yet there was no turning back. The cockpit door swung open with a creak that seemed to echo in Emma's chest. The air inside smelled of coffee, faint smoke, and the metallic tang of stress. The captain slumped over the console, unconscious, one hand resting uselessly on the throttle. The co-pilot's eyes fluttered open, and then rolled back, leaving Emma staring at the empty helm of a plane teetering on disaster. Emma hesitated for just a heartbeat, a shiver running down her spine. Hundreds of lives pressed down on her shoulders like a tangible weight. Every passenger, every screaming child, every terrified adult, she was responsible. Her ROTC training had taught her courage. Her simulators had taught her mechanics, but nothing had prepared her for this. A full-sized commercial jet, 2 failing engines, and a storm brewing just ahead. She swallowed hard. The alarms blared incessantly, red lights flashing across the cockpit like warning stars. She forced herself to breathe, to focus. Step 1, stabilize. Step 2, assess the damage. Step 3, survive. Her fingers flew across the controls instinctively, flipping switches, adjusting throttles, and overriding the autopilot. Engine 1 had sputtered, sending erratic warnings through the console. The hydraulics were inconsistent, leaving steering limited. Emma recalled the countless simulations in the ROTC hangar, how to maintain control when systems failed, how to trust her instincts over instruments. "Eagle One," she said into the radio, her voice steady despite the chaos, "I have the controls. Stabilizing at 32,000 feet. Please guide me." The radio crackled. "Nightstorm, maintain current altitude and heading. Flaps at 25%. We'll walk you through the approach. Stay calm." Emma nodded, though the pilots couldn't see her. She glanced at the window. 2 F-22 fighters streaked past, close enough to make her feel the rush of displaced air. The lead pilot opened his canopy mid-flight and shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar. "We're with you. You've got this, Nightstorm." Her pulse thundered. Every lesson, every drill, every late-night session flashed through her mind. She moved with precision born of adrenaline, sweat streaking her forehead. The passengers below were oblivious to her competence. Some screamed, some prayed, some froze in terror. But she didn't have time to reassure them. Every second counted. The plane pitched violently again, jolting Emma against the controls. Sparks flew from one of the panels, and a warning light screamed in red fury. She leaned over the yoke, adjusting flaps, throttle, and stabilizers. Her stomach lurched, but her hands were steady. Fear was there, gnawing at her chest, but it was no longer paralysis. It was focus, clarity, control. "Nightstorm approaching storm cells. Prepare for turbulence. You'll need to adjust heading 30 degrees left," Eagle One instructed. Emma's fingers tightened around the yoke. She adjusted, tilting the plane as instructed. Lightning illuminated the sky ahead, jagged and blinding. The engines groaned under strain, and she felt the fuselage shudder with every gust of wind. Passengers screamed as the cabin tilted, some being flung against seatbacks. She gritted her teeth and ignored the chaos around her, trusting her training, her instincts, and the guidance from the F-22 pilots above. The cockpit was a ballet of danger. Red lights blinked, switches clicked, alarms screamed. Every decision had to be perfect. A single mistake, a single miscalculation, and hundreds of lives could vanish in seconds. Emma's mind raced. She visualized each instrument, each gauge, each lever in her mental simulation. She could feel the plane responding, albeit reluctantly, to her inputs. "Throttle adjustments now," Eagle 1 barked. "Use full right rudder, hold steady." Emma obeyed instantly. The plane jerked, pitching dangerously, and she nearly lost her balance. Sweat dripped into her eyes, stinging, but she refused to blink. She counted in her head, 1, 2, 3, and nudged the rudder controls back. The plane responded, stabilizing just enough for her to breathe a small, cautious sigh of relief. Suddenly, another challenge, a sharp vibration along the fuselage. The rudder wasn't responding as it should. The hydraulic failure was worsening. Emma's pulse quickened. Steering would now be limited. Every adjustment had to be calculated, precise, perfect. Outside, the storm raged closer, clouds thick and menacing, rain pounding against the windows. Lightning forked across the horizon, illuminating the terrifying path ahead. Her thoughts flicked to the passengers. Some of them were staring in awe, some in terror, trying to make sense of the young woman controlling their fate. She forced herself to push those thoughts aside. Right now, she had one responsibility: keep the plane flying. The roar of engines, the screech of alarms, the thunder outside. The world had reduced to a chaotic symphony of pressure and danger. Emma's hands moved automatically, flipping switches, adjusting flaps, and monitoring every gauge. Her training was alive inside her, a perfect machine of instinct and knowledge. "Night Storm," Eagle 1 said, "you're extraordinary, keep focus, keep her level. You're the only one standing between this plane and disaster." Emma's teeth clenched. She knew the truth of it. She wasn't just a passenger. She was the pilot now. The weight of responsibility was crushing, but she welcomed it, transforming fear into action. The plane lurched again violently, a reminder that time was against her. One engine threatened to fail completely. The cockpit alarm screamed in a chorus of red fury. She glanced at the horizon, where dark clouds twisted and churned, threatening to swallow the plane whole. Her mind raced. She remembered the lessons from her ROTC instructors. Fear is a tool, not a cage. She inhaled, centering herself. She would not panic. She would not fail. Hundreds of lives depended on her, and the F-22 pilots above had faith in her. She adjusted the throttles, nudged the yoke, and stabilized the plane. For a brief second, the chaos seemed to pause. Sparks still flickered, engines still groaned, alarms still screamed, but she had control. Below her, passengers whispered prayers, some clutching each other, some staring at her with a mix of awe and disbelief. One father held his child, eyes wide, mouthing silent thanks. Emma's heart ached, but she didn't allow herself to falter. Then came the storm's first massive jolt, a lightning bolt striking dangerously close, shaking the fuselage violently. Emma felt the plane tilt, almost uncontrollable. She gritted her teeth, pushing every ounce of strength and skill into the yoke. She whispered to herself, "I can do this. I will do this." Cliffhanger. As the storm closed in and the engines threatened to fail completely, Emma realized that the most dangerous part of this flight wasn't just the storm or the failing systems, it was the landing. And she had no idea if she would survive the next 10 minutes. The storm had grown relentless. Outside, gray clouds churned like angry seas, rain hammered the fuselage, and lightning danced dangerously close to the wings. The plane groaned under the pressure, metal screaming against wind and turbulence. Emma Hayes, passenger 12F turned pilot, gritted her teeth, hands white-knuckled around the controls. Every second was a battle of instinct, training, and nerve. "Night Storm, you need a steep climb. Engines are unstable. Maintain flaps at 25%, Eagle 1's voice crackled through the radio. Emma's pulse raced. She glanced at the altimeter, 32,000 feet, and felt the weight of every life on board pressing into her chest. She adjusted the throttles carefully, each movement calculated precise. The plane lurched violently, almost pitching sideways, and she pressed her body against the yoke, forcing it to respond. The passengers screamed as the cabin pitched. Drinks flew from trays, papers scattered like autumn leaves, and a mother clutched her child, whispering frantic prayers. Emma ignored the chaos. There was no time to soothe fear, only time to act. Lightning illuminated the sky, blindingly bright. Emma adjusted the yoke to compensate for the sudden gusts, the plane shuddering under the strain. One engine sputtered ominously, warning lights blinking red. Her mind raced, recalling every emergency simulation she had endured. Each one had been a practice drill. This was now the real test. Throttle adjustments, Nightstorm. Full right rudder now, Eagle 1 barked. Emma obeyed instantly. The plane responded, hesitantly at first, then steadied. She could feel the hydraulics straining, a mechanical groan beneath her hands that threatened to betray her at any moment. Sweat streamed down her forehead, mixing with the rainwater that had seeped through a ventilation vent. A flash of lightning revealed the two F-22 jets above, streaking past like guardians of the storm. The lead pilot's canopy opened mid-flight, and he shouted into the radio, barely audible over the roar of wind and engines. "We've got you, Nightstorm. Keep her steady. We're right here." Emma nodded, even though he couldn't see her. The precision maneuvers she had practiced countless times in the simulator now translated into real-life skill. She adjusted the flaps, nudged the throttle, and corrected the yoke. The plane trembled violently, yet she held her focus, every muscle coiled like a spring, every thought sharp as a blade. "Storm ahead is severe," Eagle 1 warned. "Visibility will drop. You must stay level. If you lose control, you'll lose altitude fast." Emma's stomach lurched. Below, passengers clutched their seats, screaming. One teenager whispered a terrified, "Please, someone save us." Her jaw tightened. She couldn't allow panic to take hold, not for them, not for herself. The plane tilted sharply as a gust of wind struck the wing. Emma countered instinctively, nudging the yoke and adjusting the throttle. The fuselage groaned, but the plane steadied enough to maintain altitude. Her breathing was shallow, each inhale sharp as glass. Lightning flashed again, momentarily illuminating the terror etched on passengers' faces. Then came the first critical challenge, a sudden drop in engine output. Engine 2 sputtered, warning lights flashing violently. Emma's heart leapt, her fingers moving instinctively over the controls. Come on," she whispered under her breath, willing the plane to respond. Eagle 1's voice came again, calm but urgent. "Nightstorm, you're doing fine. Keep her level. We'll guide you through this. Adjust flaps to 20, throttle 75%, then a slight climb to 33,000 feet. Ready." Emma nodded, focusing. The climb was treacherous, the engines groaning under the strain. Sparks flickered from a panel, a reminder that the plane's systems were failing. Every move had to be perfect, or disaster was inevitable. Passengers below screamed as the cabin pitched, unsecured items flying across the aisle. A mother shielded her child with trembling arms. Emma's gaze flicked briefly at the scene, then back at the instruments. She could not allow herself to look away for more than a heartbeat. Adjusting the yoke, throttles, and flaps, she initiated the climb. The plane shuddered violently, metal protesting, alarms blaring. Sweat poured down her face, but she refused to falter. Her mind worked in overdrive, recalling every emergency procedure, every drill, every lesson drilled into her during ROTC and simulator training. "Nightstorm," Eagle 1 barked. "You're extraordinary. Hold steady. We're right above you. You can do this. Maintain control or you'll lose her in the storm." Emma's jaw tightened. She had no choice. She was no longer passenger 12 if she was the pilot, the guardian of every soul aboard. The plane groaned under the strain, lurching again as turbulence slammed it from the side. She corrected with precise nudges of the yoke, coordinating throttles with her instinct, her every move focused on survival. Lightning struck dangerously close, illuminating the cockpit. Sparks erupted from an overloaded circuit panel. Emma's hands moved instinctively, flipping switches, adjusting stabilizers, keeping the plane aloft. The storm raged with relentless fury as if testing her will. Below, passengers braced themselves, whispers of prayers blending with screams. Some glanced toward the cockpit, noticing the young woman standing at the controls with unwavering resolve. Her composure amidst the chaos was almost otherworldly. Suddenly, the plane lurched violently to one side. Emma's stomach dropped, heart hammering in her chest. The hydraulic failure had worsened, steering was limited. Every input had to be precise. A miscalculation would be catastrophic. "Night Storm, prepare for lateral correction," Eagle One's voice commanded. 30-degree adjustment to avoid wind shear. Timing is critical. Emma adjusted instantly. The plane responded, teetering on the edge of control, then stabilizing. Sparks flickered from the panels again, engine strained, but she held steady. The storm, though violent, could not shake her. Not yet. Her mind flashed to the passengers below, hundreds of lives hanging by a thread. She couldn't fail them. She couldn't fail herself. She gritted her teeth and focused on the next step, her instincts guiding her as the storm raged around them. Cliffhanger, the plane was still alive, barely, but the storm was far from over. As lightning illuminated the horizon and the engines groaned with impending failure, Emma realized the hardest part wasn't the climb. It was surviving the storm and preparing for a landing she had never attempted in real life. The storm had grown into a merciless, living beast. Lightning tore across the sky in jagged streaks, thunder rattled the fuselage, and torrential rain slammed against the plane like 1,000 hammers. The engines groaned under the stress, each cough of metal sending Emma's pulse into overdrive. She gritted her teeth, knuckles white on the yoke, and adjusted the throttles with meticulous care. Eagle One's voices guided her through the chaos. "Night Storm, maintain heading. Avoid the storm's core. Climb to 34,000 feet, then prepare for lateral adjustment. Engines are unstable, hydraulics failing. You have limited control. Focus." Emma swallowed, her mind racing. Limited control. Those words could mean only one thing. A single mistake could send the plane into a deadly spiral. She focused, blocking out the screams from below, the chaos of the cabin, the fear clawing at her chest. She had to remain calm. Failure was not an option. The plane lurched violently as a gust hit the left wing. Sparks erupted from a panel, alarms blared, and the cabin tilted dangerously. Drinks flew across the aisle, passengers clutched at each other, and a mother wrapped her arms around her crying child. Emma leaned into the yoke, adjusting flaps and throttles, forcing the plane to respond to her commands. Outside, the F-22 fighters streaked past like protective shadows. One pilot shouted over the roar of engines, voice barely audible. "We've got you, Night Storm. Adjust heading 20 degrees right. You're doing fine." Emma nodded, though the pilot couldn't see her. She executed the maneuver, the plane quivering under the strain. Her hands moved instinctively, muscles coiled, every decision precise. She had trained for emergencies in simulators, but nothing could replicate the roar of engines failing in real life, the sheer terror of hundreds of lives in her hands. Suddenly, the plane dropped violently. Emma's stomach lurched, and she felt herself pressed against the yoke as the fuselage shuddered. Engine 1 sputtered, warning lights flashing in red fury. She pressed every lever, adjusted every dial, held her breath, willing the plane to obey her. "Night Storm," Eagle One's voice barked. "Prepare for severe wind shear. Timing is critical. You need to climb and maintain heading." Emma obeyed instinctively. She nudged the yoke, adjusted throttles, and initiated the climb. The plane groaned, metal creaking as if in protest. Sparks flickered from the overloaded panels. Rain battered the windows like bullets. Every motion had to be perfect, every calculation exact. Below, passengers screamed, their prayers lost in the storm's fury. Some stared toward the cockpit, wide-eyed and terrified, as the young woman in 12F handled the controls with uncanny precision. Emma barely had time to notice. Her focus was absolute. Survival depended on it. Lightning illuminated the horizon, revealing the twisted darkness of the storm. Emma adjusted the flaps, nudged the rudder, and countered a violent gust of wind that threatened to tip the plane into a catastrophic roll. She whispered to herself, "I can do this. I must do this." The engines groaned again, warning lights flashing. Hydraulics were failing further, making steering unpredictable. Emma's stomach dropped. She glanced at the altimeter, 34,000 feet, dropping slightly with every turbulent strike. She could feel the plane fighting her, metal straining against her commands. "Night storm," Eagle One said, calm but urgent. "You are the only thing keeping this plane in the air. Do not lose focus. Adjust heading 15 degrees left. Engines may fail at any moment. Stabilize immediately after." Emma's fingers flew over the controls. The plane responded, hesitantly at first, then stabilized enough to continue. Sweat streamed down her face, mingling with the rain seeping into the cockpit. The roar of engines, the blinding flashes of lightning, the screams from below, it was overwhelming, but Emma refused to give in. Her mind flashed to the passengers. She imagined their faces, their fear, their lives hanging in the balance. She couldn't fail them. She wouldn't. Every ounce of training, every late-night simulation, every drill she had endured converged into this moment. She was no longer just Emma Hayes. She was Nightstorm, and Nightstorm did not fail. A particularly violent jolt hit the plane, throwing it sideways. Sparks flew from one of the panels, and alarms screamed in furious chorus. Emma adjusted with precision, flaps, throttle, yoke, every move calculated. The storm seemed alive, testing her, pushing her to the edge. Passengers screamed, some clutching seatbacks, some gripping each other in terror. A young mother whispered prayers to her child. Emma's eyes flicked briefly to the cabin, then back to the instruments. She could not afford distraction. One miscalculation, 1 second of hesitation, and disaster was inevitable. The F-22 pilots above performed protective maneuvers, blocking the strongest gusts of wind, guiding her through pockets of turbulence. One pilot shouted, "Nightstorm, align with the clearing ahead. Adjust climb to 35,000 feet. You've got this." Emma's pulse thundered in her ears. She adjusted the controls, nudged the rudder, and initiated the climb. The plane shuddered violently under the strain, alarms blaring, warning lights flashing. But she held it steady. Inch by inch, foot by foot, she fought the storm, her every action precise, her mind razor-sharp. Then came the lightning strike that made her heart stop. A bolt hit dangerously close to the plane, illuminating the cabin in blinding light. Sparks erupted from the panels, metal groaning under the force. Emma's hands flew across the controls, stabilizing the plane just enough to prevent disaster. "Nightstorm," Eagle One shouted, "prepare for descent. The storm is closing. You'll need to maneuver through turbulence to reach the airfield. Focus." Emma's stomach lurched. The landing was still far away. She could feel the engine straining, the hydraulics failing further, the plane's life hanging by a thread. And yet she refused to falter. Every instinct screamed survival. Every ounce of courage surged through her veins. The plane pitched again violently, the cabin screaming with chaos. Emma adjusted the yoke, nudged the throttle, and held her breath. The F-22 pilots circled above, protective, guiding her every move. She felt the weight of hundreds of lives pressing into her, yet she moved with calm precision, every decision exact. Cliffhanger. As the storm raged with unrelenting fury and the engines threatened to fail completely, Emma realized the true test had only just begun. The plane was still aloft, but the landing, the final impossible challenge, loomed ahead like a knife edge. And one wrong move could cost them all. The storm was still howling as Emma Hayes, passenger 12F turned pilot, prepared for the most critical maneuver of her life, landing the plane. The wind shrieked against the fuselage, rain plastered the windows, and lightning flashed around the wings, momentarily illuminating the terrified faces of the passengers. Her hands were white-knuckled on the yoke, pulse hammering like a drum in her chest. Eagle One's voice cut through the radio, steady but urgent. "Nightstorm, you are approaching the airfield. Runway visibility is low. Engines are critical. Hydraulic failure is worsening. You must execute a precision landing. We'll guide you step by step. Stay calm." Emma swallowed hard. This was it. Everything she had trained for, every late-night simulation, every ROTC drill, every emergency she had imagined, all of it had led to this moment. The plane groaned under her touch, one engine sputtering, sparks flickering from the console. She could feel the aircraft straining against her commands. "Throttle adjustments, Nightstorm. Reduce speed gradually. Keep flaps at 30%. Maintain alignment with runway heading," Eagle One instructed. Emma adjusted carefully. The plane lurched violently as she nudged the yoke, throttles responding sluggishly. The hydraulics were failing further, limiting her control. She fought to keep the plane steady, every muscle coiled, every nerve taut. The runway lights appeared faintly through the storm, a distant beacon of hope amid the chaos. Below, passengers clung to their seats, faces pale, eyes wide with terror. Some whispered frantic prayers, others gasped with each violent shudder. Emma didn't have time to look at them, didn't have time for fear. Her mind was entirely on the controls, the instruments, the guidance from Eagle One. The plane pitched again violently as turbulence slammed the fuselage. Sparks flew from overloaded panels, alarms blaring in furious chorus. Emma countered instinctively, nudging the yoke, adjusting flaps, balancing throttle inputs. The plane wavered, teetered, then stabilized, responding to her precise adjustments. "Nightstorm, align with final approach. Reduce altitude slowly. You're doing fine, but focus is critical. Flaps to 40%, Eagle One guided." Emma nodded, though the pilot couldn't see her. The plane groaned under the strain, every system warning, screaming for attention. Her hands moved in perfect synchronization, moving the yoke, adjusting rudder, monitoring engine output. She could feel the aircraft trembling beneath her, alive with tension, each gust of wind a potential disaster. The storm was relentless. Lightning flashed dangerously close to the wingtips, illuminating the terrified expressions of the passengers. The plane tilted violently, and Emma felt herself pressed into the yoke. Her heart raced, but her movements were precise, calculated. She was no longer a passenger. She was Nightstorm, and Nightstorm had no room for fear. Below, the runway lights grew closer, a faint strip of salvation through the rain. Emma adjusted the throttles, nudged the flaps, and countered a violent crosswind that threatened to push the plane off course. Sparks erupted from a panel as the hydraulic system faltered. She pressed forward with even more focus, relying on instinct, training, and adrenaline. "Throttle 75%. Keep wings level. You're lined up, Nightstorm. Prepare for flare and landing gear engagement," Eagle One instructed. Emma's stomach dropped. Flare. The moment when she had to lift the nose slightly to prevent a crash landing. She could almost feel the plane responding to the shift in gravity, the metal groaning, the tires ready to kiss the wet tarmac. Her hands were steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. She lowered the landing gear manually, hearing the wrenching screech as it deployed. The plane pitched violently again. Sparks flew from the instrument panel and alarms blared. Emma's breath caught. One wrong move and the landing would be catastrophic. She visualized the runway, the plane's trajectory, every adjustment, every calculation. "Flare now," Eagle One's voice commanded. Emma adjusted the yoke, raising the nose slightly. The plane shuddered, tires screeching as they touched down. Rain and water sprayed across the fuselage. She countered the crosswinds, adjusting rudder, brakes, and throttles, fighting the failing hydraulics. The passengers screamed, some gripping seatbacks, some whispering prayers. The plane lurched violently but remained on the runway. Inches from disaster, she nudged the controls again, stabilizing the plane. Sparks flickered, alarms screamed, engines groaned, but the aircraft responded. Inch by inch, foot by foot, she guided the plane forward, braking manually, feeling the friction between the wheels and wet tarmac. Below, passengers clutched each other, wide-eyed with awe. Some had begun to understand that the young woman in 12F had just performed a miracle. Emma didn't notice them. Her mind was entirely on the controls, the runway, the failing systems, the storm still raging around them. The plane trembled violently as it slowed. The hydraulics were failing further, limiting steering. Emma nudged the yoke carefully, making minor corrections with precision. She could feel the tension in the fuselage, every bolt, every panel vibrating under stress. But she held steady. The final stretch of the runway approached. Emma's pulse thundered in her ears. The engines were straining, sparks flickering, warnings blaring. But she maintained focus, adjusting flaps, throttle, and rudder in perfect synchrony. The plane slowed further. The storm's fury still raged, rain blinding the windows. Emma pressed brakes carefully, countering the last gusts of wind. The wheels screeched across the wet tarmac. Sparks erupted from panels one final time. Her heart pounded. Every passenger, every life hung in the balance. Then finally the plane came to a complete stop. The cabin fell silent. The engines hissed and sputtered, smoke rising faintly from one wing. The passengers remained frozen for a heartbeat, then erupted into cheers, applause, tears, and cries of relief. Emma's hands slowly released the yoke, her body trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. She stared out the window, rain streaking her face, lightning still flashing across the dark sky. She had done it. She had landed a failing plane through a storm, with hundreds of lives depending on her skill and courage. The cockpit door opened, and the F-22 pilots stepped forward, their faces wide with disbelief. One saluted. "Nightstorm, you saved 418 lives today. We've never seen anyone handle a jet like that." Emma blinked, stunned. She was just a passenger, and yet she had become a hero. Cliffhanger. As emergency crews approached and passengers began to disembark, a new alert flashed on the plane's instruments. Smoke from one engine lingered ominously, and Emma realized the danger might not be over yet. Something else was coming. The cabin was still buzzing with disbelief and relief as emergency crews swarmed the tarmac. Rain slicked the ground, glinting under the flashing lights of fire trucks, ambulances, and police vehicles. Passengers staggered from their seats, some sobbing, some laughing, some holding loved ones tightly as the realization of survival sank in. Emma Hayes sat in 12F, chest heaving, adrenaline still coursing like electricity through her veins. She had landed the plane. She had saved 418 lives. But she didn't feel triumphant. Exhaustion pressed her body into the seat, and her mind raced ahead. The alarms in the cockpit were still active, warning lights blinking, smoke faintly curling from the right engine. The plane's systems were compromised, and the emergency responders would not have a clear assessment until they were on the ground. "Nightstorm," Eagle One's voice crackled over the radio, calmer now but still edged with concern. "You did what most pilots couldn't even dream of, but we're seeing residual smoke from the right engine. The danger might not be over. Remain in the cockpit and let emergency crews assess." Emma's hands trembled slightly as she nodded, even though the pilots couldn't see her. She glanced around the cabin. Passengers were slowly emerging from the haze of fear, some helping each other, others still frozen in shock. A father held his son tightly, tears streaming down both their faces. A young woman whispered a shaky "thank you" through hands clasped in prayer. Emma swallowed, forcing herself to focus. A fire truck pulled up to the plane, lights spinning, hoses at the ready. A team of firefighters and paramedics approached the fuselage, assessing the smoke and damage. One firefighter shouted into a radio, "Engine still smoking but no visible flames. Proceed with caution." Emma took a deep breath, realizing that despite the landing, the situation was not fully resolved. The plane's right engine had suffered critical damage during the storm, and while it was no longer actively failing, it remained a serious threat. If the smoke ignited, the consequences would be catastrophic. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see a flight attendant cautiously approaching. "Miss, can you confirm everything's okay?" Emma shook her head, voice trembling slightly. "No, there's residual smoke in the right engine. It's unstable. Emergency crews are on their way, but—" She trailed off, realizing words could not fully capture the gravity of the situation. The flight attendant nodded, face pale but determined. "We'll keep everyone calm. Passengers are safe for now." Outside, the storm had begun to ease slightly, though clouds still churned ominously above. Lightning flashed in the distance, a reminder of how close they had come to disaster. The F-22 pilots circled overhead, ensuring no additional hazards threatened the runway or the grounded aircraft. Emma leaned back, eyes fixed on the smoke curling from the engine. She replayed the landing over and over in her mind, every adjustment, every throttle change, every tilt of the yoke. She had survived the impossible, and yet there was a gnawing feeling in her chest, an awareness that survival was only temporary until the engine was fully assessed. Suddenly, the intercom crackled. "All passengers, please remain seated while emergency crews complete their inspection. The aircraft is not fully cleared." The voice was calm, professional, but Emma could hear the tension underlying it. She exhaled sharply, then froze as the right engine emitted a faint pop followed by a spark. Smoke thickened slightly. Her stomach lurched. "Night storm," Eagle One's voice returned, sharper now. "We're seeing unusual activity from the right engine. Evacuate if necessary. Fire crews are approaching from the rear. You need to stay alert." Emma's mind raced. She had handled the storm, the landing, the failing systems, but she had not anticipated this post-landing danger. She scanned the cockpit, noting the blinking warnings and faint smoke, and realized that the plane could still be compromised. She moved to the radio. "Eagle One, fire crews approaching. Engine still unstable. What's the protocol for post-landing containment?" "Night storm, stay in the cockpit for assessment. Only evacuate if flames become imminent. You've done well so far. Do not risk the lives of the passengers by panicking," the pilot instructed. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she nodded. She could hear the rain hammering against the fuselage, passengers whispering in fear, and the faint hiss of fire retardant from hoses deployed by emergency crews. Her body ached with exhaustion, but her mind remained sharp. She had survived the impossible. She wasn't about to let residual danger undo everything. Minutes dragged by like hours. The fire crew moved cautiously around the plane, hoses spraying, scanners monitoring the smoke. Emma's eyes never left the engine. Sparks still flickered occasionally, each one a reminder that the situation remained critical. Finally, one firefighter approached the cockpit. "Ma'am, engine is unstable but contained. No flames yet. We're going to cool it and ensure full stability before evacuation. Everyone else is being cleared from the cabin safely." Emma exhaled, relief washing over her briefly, but it was short-lived. Her mind turned immediately to the implications. The plane could have exploded, the passengers could have died, and yet she had maintained control through the storm and landing. She looked at the passengers now disembarking. Some were crying, some hugging loved ones, some staring at her with awe. She wanted to stand and acknowledge them, to offer reassurance, but she remained in the cockpit, monitoring the engine. Heroism, she realized, was as much about vigilance as it was about action. Then the radio crackled again. Eagle One's voice was tense, urgent. "Night storm, hold on. We're detecting a fuel anomaly in the left wing. Combined with the right engine instability, this could escalate. Emergency crews may need to evacuate the plane immediately. Emma's stomach dropped. Another threat. She had survived the impossible storm and the landing, yet here was another danger looming, unpredictable and deadly. Her hands clenched the yoke instinctively, even though the plane was stationary. She glanced outside. Rain still pelted the tarmac, emergency crews moving swiftly, passengers kept at a safe distance. Sparks occasionally flared from the cockpit panel, reminding her that the aircraft remained a ticking bomb. "Night Storm," Eagle One's voice continued, calm but urgent. "We need your assessment. Can you advise the crew and passengers for immediate evacuation if necessary?" Emma nodded, though the pilots couldn't see her. "Prepare for evacuation," she instructed over the intercom. "Remain calm, move quickly, follow crew directions, avoid the wings and engine areas. This is a controlled procedure, do not panic." Her voice was steady, commanding, even though her heart raced. She could feel the tension radiating from passengers, yet she maintained control, guiding them safely through the instructions. Outside, emergency crews responded instantly. Fire trucks moved to the wings, hoses sprayed water and retardant, and passengers were led away in an organized, controlled evacuation. Emma stayed in the cockpit, monitoring the unstable engine, coordinating with Eagle One and ground crews. Minutes passed like lifetimes. Sparks continued to flicker, smoke still rose from the engine, but slowly, under the vigilant attention of Emma and emergency responders, the situation stabilized. The storm had passed, the plane was contained, and the passengers were safe. Emma finally allowed herself a brief moment to lean back, chest heaving, soaked in sweat and rain, trembling from adrenaline. She had faced the storm, landed a failing plane, and survived a post-landing crisis. Cliffhanger. As the last passengers were escorted away, Emma noticed a faint, ominous glow from the wing, a hint that danger might not yet be fully over. Even after surviving the storm and guiding the plane to safety, one final, unexpected challenge loomed. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle, the storm clouds beginning to break above the runway. But inside the cockpit, Emma Hayes could still see the faint, ominous glow from the right engine. Sparks flickered across the control panels, warning lights blinking insistently. Her hands gripped the yoke, knuckles white, pulse hammering like war drums. Every instinct told her to remain calm, yet a creeping dread clawed at her chest. Eagle One's voice crackled over the radio, calm but sharp. "Night Storm, we see the glow. It's a residual spark from the damaged engine. Fire crews are on it, but the risk of ignition remains. You must remain vigilant until it's fully contained." Emma nodded, even though the pilots couldn't see her. Sweat dripped into her eyes, mixing with the lingering rain, stinging but ignored. She surveyed the cockpit. Alarms still blared faintly, systems flickered, and the smell of overheated metal lingered. Every movement had to be precise. One wrong command, one misjudged action, and everything could go up in flames. She glanced outside. Emergency crews were moving cautiously along the fuselage, hoses spraying water and retardant. Fire trucks circled the plane like armored guardians. Passengers had been escorted to a safe distance, their faces a mixture of awe, fear, and relief. Emma's mind briefly flicked to them. She had guided them through the storm, through failing engines, through a precision landing. But even now, the battle wasn't over. "Night Storm, how are systems responding?" Eagle One asked. Emma's voice was steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "Smoke is minimal but persistent. Engine temperature is stabilizing but remains high. Hydraulic systems are recovering. I advise monitoring until fully contained." The F-22 pilots circled overhead, scanning the aircraft and runway for any further hazards. One shouted through the roar of engines, voice filled with admiration. "Night Storm, you've done the impossible. Keep it steady. We've got eyes on every angle." Emma nodded, mentally noting the timing of every pulse of the engine, every flicker of sparks, every shift in heat. The plane had survived the storm and the landing, but it was fragile, like a wounded animal on the edge of collapse. Her focus narrowed to a razor's edge, all extraneous thought vanishing. She could hear faint footsteps approaching the cockpit door. The flight attendant peeked in, eyes wide with concern. "Ma'am, is it safe for me to check the rear? Some passengers want to retrieve personal items from the cabin." Emma shook her head. "Not yet. The engine is unstable. Any movement could trigger sparks. Emergency crews are handling containment. No one returns to the plane until I give clearance." The attendant nodded, retreating to maintain order. Emma exhaled, gripping the yoke a little tighter, her mind scanning every gauge, every warning light, every flicker of smoke. Then the glow intensified slightly, sparks leaping from the engine casing. Emma's heart leapt into her throat. This was it, the final test. Every fiber of her being screamed for action. She adjusted the throttles, nudged the yoke slightly to counter residual vibrations, and coordinated with the fire crews over the radio. "Reduce fuel flow to the right engine gradually," she instructed. "Increase airflow for cooling. Hoses to remain on standby but avoid direct contact until temperature stabilizes. Timing is critical." The fire chief's voice crackled back. "Copy that. We've got retardant flowing at controlled intervals, monitoring closely." Emma's pulse pounded. She focused intently, adjusting controls with precision. Sparks flared but did not ignite. The engine hissed and sputtered, but it held. She could feel the tension in every bolt, every panel, every fiber of the plane's metal frame. It was alive with danger, yet responsive to her careful guidance. Minutes passed like hours. Every flicker of smoke, every pulse of heat kept her on edge. Outside, the storm clouds had mostly cleared, leaving rain-slicked tarmac and a halo of emergency lights. Passengers whispered in the distance, anxious and hopeful, their safety still not fully guaranteed. Then gradually the smoke began to dissipate. The glow faded. Sparks ceased. Emma's chest loosened, the tension in her muscles easing fractionally. She monitored the instruments for one last confirmation. Temperatures normalized, hydraulic warnings stabilized, engine readings steady. "Night storm," Eagle One said finally, relief threading through his tone. "The right engine is stable. The plane is secure. All passengers are safe. You have successfully contained the final risk." Emma allowed herself a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands released the yoke slightly, her shoulders sagging. She had survived the impossible. The storm, the failing engines, the precision landing, and now the post-landing crisis. Outside, passengers began to approach under supervision, faces still pale but breaking into tears of relief and joy. A father clutched his child tightly. A young woman collapsed into a friend's arms, and all around, murmurs of gratitude and awe echoed across the tarmac. Emma's mind raced, and for the first time, she felt the weight of what she had done. The F-22 pilots landed nearby, helmets removed, faces betraying admiration and disbelief. One approached her, hand extended, voice steady but reverent. "Nightstorm, you are extraordinary. We have seen many pilots in our careers, but what you've accomplished today, this is beyond anything we could have imagined. You saved every life on that plane." Emma shook her head, voice low, almost incredulous. "I was just doing what I had to. I could." Her words faltered, emotions overwhelming her. She realized she had crossed a line from ordinary life to extraordinary courage, a line she had never imagined crossing. Emergency crews secured the plane fully, and the passengers were safely escorted to waiting buses and medical personnel for evaluation. Cameras flashed from news crews capturing the aftermath. Social media feeds were already ablaze with live updates. Passenger saves plane in storm, and Nightstorm becomes real-life hero. Emma stepped onto the tarmac at last, breathing in the crisp night air, rain still dripping from her hair. She was met with applause, cheers, and tears of gratitude from the passengers. A mother approached, clutching her child, and whispered, "Thank you. You saved our lives." Emma's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to say something meaningful, but words failed. She simply nodded, her mind still replaying the cockpit, the storm, the landing, the engine's final flare. Then she felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see one of the F-22 pilots. "You're officially part of a very exclusive group, Nightstorm," he said with a small, respectful smile. "Your call sign has earned a new meaning tonight, not just in training, not just in simulation, but in real life." Emma blinked, absorbing the weight of his words. She had started the day as a passenger in seat 12F, an ordinary young woman traveling through a storm of fate. By nightfall, she had become a hero, known not just for skill but for courage under pressure, for calm amidst chaos, for the unthinkable feat of guiding a plane and its passengers to safety against all odds. As helicopters lifted into the sky, emergency crews completed final checks, and passengers were reunited with loved ones, Emma stood on the tarmac, drenched, exhausted, and profoundly aware of the lives she had saved. Her call sign, Nightstorm, was no longer a name whispered in simulators. It was a badge of honor, a symbol of courage, a legend that would echo far beyond the confines of a cockpit. The storm had tested her, threatened her, nearly broken her. But she had emerged victorious, a hero forged in lightning, wind, and fire. And as the night sky cleared, revealing the first stars, Emma Hayes finally allowed herself a single, quiet smile. Epilogue cliffhanger. Though the plane was secured and passengers safe, whispers began circulating among aviation authorities and military circles. The precision, skill, and composure she displayed could mean only one thing: Nightstorm's story was far from over. The call sign had just become the first chapter of a legacy that would redefine courage.